You send in 41,000 emails, 350 voice messages, 744 tweets, 48 Facebook messages, and 100.
Today, July, another video for the July edition. I'll be hunger striking towards the end of this month in a couple of weeks, and it's obviously been overdue. Critical conditions to losing every day of my life to be an internal punch bag. There is no doubts in my mind whatsoever it's a serious hardest crime. I've lost my entire life for officers to internalise my life to create a human punch bag. This has cost me significantly, to an extent I've never seen in my entire life how much these individuals have cost me. I don't know if they're submitting information, but what I do know is it's high risk and it's illegal. It's costing me every day of my life. They've been committing crime against my power up to 3,000 times a day internally to blame mental illness or disability, and it's destroyed somebody's life. They've used me in a controlled state for some of the most sadistic crime I've ever seen in my entire life, and it's cost me the best years of my life. It's completely destroyed somebody's life. They had no rights to do it, no entitlement to do it. They're misusing information in the system or submitting information in the system that's costing individuals their life. And majority of the time they're getting sadistic and perverted gratification out of doing it. They've completely destroyed my life. As I said in previous videos, I've never been in a sexual relationship. Lost out countless times on sexual relations. I've also tried to explain to some extent what it is these individuals have actually done using institutionalization. So I'll try again. They've created a situation whereby other males are apparently entitled to my power over women or my sexual prowess. So every time that I've ever spoken to a woman, which has been potentially over 50 occasions or whatever else, they seem to be sleeping with other males, usually the same people time and time again. And that's because the system or the officers has allowed these individuals full entitlement in an institutional self to my reproductive rights or my sex power over women, and they're essentially committing crime against me from the system. So every time I speak to a woman or a female, I'm having officers or the system commit crime against me, preventing me from having sex. As I've said in another video, they create a situation whereby they've got a job to stop me getting power in society, and they've cost me more than what the jobs are worth. As I've said, this is no joke. They could have potentially cost me sexual relations with 50 women, potentially 50 women. And if it's not 50 women, it's enough for me to make that claim. I've never been in a sexual relationship. Every single woman I've ever spoken to has ended up sleeping with another male, and every time that's happened has been internalised now into internal breaking sessions so officers can commit crime against me. So they've created their own problem, or the system's created his own problem in an institutional self where it wants to commit crime against me internally, and it's always been apparent to me in society that this is not natural life course. It's cost me my entire life. They destroyed somebody's life committing crime against somebody. So as I said, there's no doubts there needs to be some regulation on what it is they're actually doing, because there is no chance whatsoever that they should be costing people sexual relations. And if it's 50 women or potentially 50 women like I claim, there is no doubts it's beyond a detective constable and way beyond a senior probation officer. So they're in the system as officers. I'm a member of the public sat in my own home, and they're making decisions or using institutionalisation that's costing me sexual relations, and in some cases it's costing me entitlement to what they get themselves. So as a member of the public, I'm entitled to the sex power over the women that they're humiliating me in front of. Does this make sense? They're making decisions about my life to get masculinity or prowess out of it that's had a negative, significant negative impact on my life, costing me sexual prowess or power over potentially 50 women. Yet some of those women are women that they sleep with themselves. So they're using the system or weaponising the system to gain prowess or power in the system or get recognition or a subculture as such. That's the only thing, to create their own subculture where they commit crime against masculinity or power using institutionalisation, and I'm entitled to that they're using themselves. So they're essentially weaponising the system to commit crime against somebody or people, which is a mass group of people. Either way, regardless of with this, they have stripped out every single bit of my sex drives. They stripped out every bit of my sex power or sex drive. So there is no chance I'll ever have sex again at 32-year-old. And I can't think of anything, any conviction or any reason that would give these officers any rights, or the system any rights to make that decision. And there is no doubts whatsoever in my mind, or factually, you cannot have sexual intercourse. This shuts out all my sex prowess and all my sex power. I've got very limited recognition of sexual tension, sexual prowess. They've completely destroyed somebody's life in an institutional self. All I can say is, like I said, I'm going on hunger strike on the 28th of this month. It's been obviously known to me for months, but it's been realistically known for years. I've just been constantly doing it, and I've been pulled off it time and time and time again. But the fact of the matter are, I'm in a situation now at 32, we haven't got a life. Like, I've got all my sex power interned, all my sex drives interned, my jaw's completely wide shut in a controlled state. It's putting pressure on my internal organs. The physical restraining or restriction on my ability to breathe, because they've snagged it in an institutional cell's getting worse and worse. I've been homeless for over 2 years now, living on the street in a tent. I'm not getting housed in a council flat at this age. So what steps do you take now? I'm entitled to a vast amount of justice the South Yorkshire Police are not taking accountability for. I've lost every day of my 20s, never been in a sexual relationship. I've just put a video on how many events I've lost. So I've just uploaded a video of how many events I've lost just this year. Just since leaving Shepcote Lane last year, how many events I've missed whilst institutionalised, and there's about 5 events on there. Any one of them events is enough to get an officer in jail. I'd get in prison if I stopped. So if I did that kind of magnitude, if I stopped that kind of event, I'd go to jail. So why is it? That's just 1 year. I've missed 5 events institutionalised in 1 year since Shepcote Lane. Never mind the 10, 12, 15 or 18 years it's gone on for, which are the interjections they're supposed to have imposed. They're supposed to have been involved and intervened on numerous occasions, and they failed to do so, and it's at my expense, costing me my life in society and costing me every minute or every day that they're not wanting to account for, and they're not wanting to justify. Like, they're not wanting to do justice for it. So for that reason, there needs to be some regulation or restriction on how much crime they're actually committing against people's power in an institutional self, in a controlled state. Because the facts of the matter are this: I've been in a controlled state for an excessive amount of time, over 12 years, potentially more. And in that time, I've been controlled into some of the most sadistic humiliation and degrading you could ever imagine. So for that reason, there needed to be some regulation on what it is that these individuals are actually doing, or what they feel as though they're entitled to, without any regulation to it. Because it's cost me my life, factually. It's destroyed somebody's life. So this problem's not stopping. If like I said in the other videos, I've made this point, or made this complaint that I'm voicing now to South Yorkshire Police in interview. I've said this to the individuals in interview. You've stripped all my sex prowess out, I'm completely institutionalised, my jaw's completely wide shut, it's pressing on my internal organs, causing severe pain and agony. I'm in absolute catastrophic sleep debt because you've internalised my sleep pattern. I'm in a literally mindless state because you've pulled all my ability to think for myself out. This is just getting worse and worse. Internal breaking sessions and mortification of self-stripping out the self, committing crime up to 3,000 times a day into the power of my own life, internal transgressions, internal accusations. You want to put it down as mental illness, but the fact of the matter is, it's blatantly obvious to me and apparent to me, as clear as the difference between black and white, that this is very serious. This is a serious problem, and if they're not wanting to account for it and not wanting to treat it as a serious issue, they should never have involved me in the system, because it's costing me more than what a detective constable is in jail. It's costing me more than what their regional directors are in jail. They've cost me potentially, like I said, we'll start off with potentially 50 women. They could have potentially cost me sexual relations with 50 women, never mind the work, never mind the quality of everyday life. Just sat here doing this now, I'm at a massive negative impact on reduced quality of life, just on the way that I'm voicing this, I'm communicating, just in the quality of life, because of how much they've stripped out. The facts of the matter are, they need to start regulating what they're doing with this, because they're committing more crime against me in an institutional self than what's going through the local Crown Court, and then they're wanting to uphold like some level of high horse, like they're wanting to uphold some rational sense of genuine society or uphold some sense of authority or law-abiding public life, but you cannot really do that when they're committing crimes against humanity, internally stripping out my sex drives and then not wanting to know what that is. They don't have a clue what that is. So they've internalised every bit of my ability to get sex power over women, cost me sexual relations with 50 women, but then if I went out and committed an assault, or if I go out and commit drunken disorderly, for example, not that I drink at this moment, but it's just an example, if I went out and committed those kind of minor crimes that could be dealt with by a magistrate, for example, just drunken disorderly, I'd be liable for prosecution and a criminal record or a criminal conviction on that basis, on the fact I've broken the law. So why is it I or anybody else in the public will be liable or eligible for a criminal conviction or to be penalised for something as minor as drunken disorderly, when officers or the system can go in my institutional self with no relevant convictions and strip out all my sex power and make the decision on their own that I'll never have sex again at 32-year-old or at 28-year-old or whatever? Why is it those individuals are making that decision and then committing crime against me internally, inflicting crippling, iris degrading up to 3,000 times a day? Why is it I should be subject to iris torture internally so that individual officers can blame it on mental illness or drug use when it's worse than any crime that will go through the courtroom this week? So internally, whilst they're stripping out my sex power, I'm subject to crippling, high-risk transgressions or killing of my power to strip it out, or serious high-risk breaking sessions internally that's illegal, stripping out my sex drives just on there for nothing, but that's worse than any crime that will go through the courtroom this week. So what I'm trying to say is this: I'm not saying it's some two-tier system or they're entitled to get away with what they want. I just think what these individuals are actually doing, especially in this case where I'm making these complaints, is not being correctly documented or correctly made public or being made known what they're actually doing, because I can guarantee now it's not in the system that the officers in charge or the system itself has committed crime against my power up to 3,000 times a day internally and stripped out every bit of my sex drives or sex power and every single bit of me having knowledge they've done anything wrong. They've been committing crime against my ability to speak for myself internally, internal mortification of self and internal breaking sessions, stripping away any knowledge that these individuals, whether it's police or probation, have got any liability for crime, and stripped away any knowledge that I've got rights or entitlement to justice. So they've essentially done what they want and then committed crime against me and stripped out me having any recognition or knowledge they've done anything wrong. And I'm getting more and more institutionalised, more and more in a brain dead state, in a critical condition, so that officers can replicate committing crime into my power and strip it out. So I'll summarise what I'm saying: they've made their own human punch bag that causes not only physical crippling agony, but internal breaking sessions every day that's costing me my life and furthering and worsening an institutional process. But the fact of the matter is the system doesn't take accountability for what an institutional self is. I've tried to make it clear in a police station, and I don't think these entry-level officers even know what that is, because they could have something similar on it themselves. Maybe not to this extent that's torturing them, but they will still be under some level of control. But the fact of the matter is, or the problem I've got is, I'm subject to internal breaking sessions inflicting crippling degrading that's costing me my life. And if the system or the officers that must have opened it or must have had some involvement with it, if anybody that's had the involvement in it doesn't want to take accountability for it, as I previously stated, they shouldn't be doing it. All I can say is 28th there'll be an hunger strike. I'm gonna have to probably send my phone off for repair because the mics are broken. That's why I'm not using them. The microphones are broken. The phone's broken, it doesn't accept the microphone, but problem still continues. Critical condition, high risk, crippling, degrading internally up to 3,000 times a day. Internal mortification of self, stripping out the cell, still in a 100% control state. The power of my own life, snag pressing on my internal organs, pressure on the back of my skull, struggling to communicate, speak effectively, or even communicate this may look or appear on this video like I'm communicating or verbally communicating in an acceptable way, but realistically it's very it's not as good as what it should be, is what I'm trying to say. It may appear on this clip or footage that I'm talking or communicating correctly or to an acceptable standard, but I can communicate a lot more effectively, a lot more fluently, a lot more understandable than what I am now. I'm just struggling really with my ability to think for myself, as I've said. They snagged my ability to speak for myself. They've pulled out all my ignorance, which is obviously leaving me in sleep debt. I'm sleep deprived beyond what anybody in the public could ever imagine. Sex drives, I've obviously never been in a sexual relationship. I've not concluded sexual intercourse now in 7 years, so that's obviously a factor. I've been homeless for 2 years or over 2 years now, living on the street or living in a tent. That's obviously having an impact on the way that I live at the moment. Not been in employment now since 2019, 2020, since COVID. It's now 2025 July, so that's 5 years, potentially more. Problem goes on and on. It's just costing me every day of my life in a controlled state to be used as a punch bag. And as the next video will state, hopefully I'll have my microphones fixed. The next video, once I've got my microphones fixed, hopefully will be a declaration of hunger strike, and it's been way overdue, years overdue. I've been in a critical condition. I'm now 32-year-old, I'm not 21, where it'll take 6 months to get out of an hostel into a council flat. I'm 32 and it's cost me every day in between. So these officers are now saying, look, we want you to go into an hostel now at 32 when I should be married with a mortgage, with all this backlog of debt that they're not wanting to account for, when I could have just got myself out 10 years ago in 6 months. Does this make sense? I could have got myself out at 21-year-old within 6 months to a year with a council flat and a girlfriend. The system's made the choice to institutionalise somebody and have intervention in their life, and I'm still sat here now 11 years later, never been in a sexual relationship, very limited work experience, no relevant level of education, not even been on holiday in those 11 years, obviously never married, no children. It would have only taken me a year back then on my own drives or own power. The system's made the choice to intervene, so they've made the choice as the system to take control of me using an institutional self or have more input in my life for whatever reason they've used. I don't know, but the fact of the matter is I'm now sat here 11 years later in a critical condition. I've lost every day in between, and they've still not wanted to pay the debt for all the years I've lost being in a controlled state. They're just not taking accountability. Like I said, not being on holiday, no sexual relationship, not one in 11 years. I mean, that alone's enough. That alone is enough to hunger strike to death. Like, I'm not saying I'll die on this hunger strike, I'm just saying hunger strikes potentially could endanger life. So, problem still persists, problem still continues, and hopefully the next video, if my phone is fixed in time, will be a declaration of hunger strike, and it's 100% South Yorkshire Police's issue. No doubts whatsoever. You cannot live in an institutional self, and you cannot live in society without justice or some level of compensation for what they've done. They've got to somehow account for the crimes they've committed and start looking at, they have to start looking at fully deinstitutionalising somebody. That means pulling out an institutional self 10, 12, 18 years worth to rebuild my life, to try and get married, to try and get a girl, to try and get children. They've not accounted for any of it. They're taking no recognition, no accountability. So regardless of what my choice is or not, they're doing what they want from the system and creating their own story for in the system. It's completely destroying my life every day. It's cost me, or at my expense, every day of my life. It's destroyed every minute or every day of my life in society, so the officers in the system can create their own story for in the system, and there needs to start being justice or consequences for when they're doing that. Critical condition, problem still persists. July 2025.